Welcome to the table. I am JM. This is a podcast put on by the good people at Pulpit Rock. This season, we are talking about change. What has changed in our culture that we can't go back? We have to sort of embrace what's kind of put out before us with the fear and the hope that we have in that, and kind of finding ways to navigate around difficult topics. And so with me, as always this season, we have Thomas Thompson, Susie Bates, and Kyle Collins, and Jonathan Cleveland, who is going to be sort of hosting this episode. So Jonathan, what is the change that we are talking about today?
Yes, I'm really excited to talk about this one with you all. It might sound a little theoretical or maybe esoteric, but I really think this is something that we're just kind of suffering from, at least in the U.S., this particular change. There is a shift that has happened, and we have become a highly segmented tribal culture. Mm-hmm. Now, it's a shift. I don't want to say that like this has never been the case and now suddenly it is. We always, as humans, kind of tend to clump together in tribes and segment ourselves off. But there's something that is happening in this country that we are more entrenched in different mindsets than ever before. And when I say the word tribal, I just mean that it is a shared mindset. There are shared languages within that. There's some culture, some internal culture. And I think there were moments in our history, and I'm not trying to deify the past, but I think there were moments where we were a little bit more broadly unified. But it seems right now we are so segmented as a culture, and there are some deeply divided segments of our society, and then there are some just lightly divided things that are kind of comical or lighthearted, but are real divides for us. We are not a culture. We are cultures. And all of us as individuals, we belong to many tribes. And what's interesting is those tribes are not set up by demographics. So it's not like, well, all 30-somethings think this way. But within the group of 30-somethings, you'll have a lot of different mindsets. They're also not set up necessarily by ethnicity or that sort of thing. There's a lot of crossover within these tribes. And there are some big tribes. Obviously, our political landscape is this way. There are a few big tribes out there, not just two. There's a handful of different segments within each party. But then there are thousands of smaller tribes that we could list off. And I guess that's where I wanted to engage you guys just a little bit. When you think about this and what I've described, what are some of the tribes that you see? What are some of the tribes that maybe you even belong to as a person here in this culture?
I would say I'm in the mom tribe.
Okay. That is not a tribe I am in. What is the mom tribe?
A tribe of moms.
Okay.
More specifically, I would say I'm in a mom of daughters tribe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm thinking, my wife and I talk even about just living in Colorado and some of the values in this COVID season. There's things that we value. There's things that I feel like are uniquely Coloradan, that like outdoor spaces and chances to recreate, that as we compare to other parts of the country, we're like, we're glad we live here and not here. And these are the things that are true about living in Colorado, is we go to the park on Saturday and we walk our dog and we, spend time outside. And so that's one. I think there's hobbies. There's tribes around hobbies. I'm into fly fishing. There's a whole community around that. There's certain gear you have to have and other gear you shouldn't have. And, that's a silly one, but I think there's something to it.
Yeah.
No, there are. I mean, that's one of the markers of being part of a culture or a tribe. Do you have the right language? Do you have the right materials? Right. Gaming is one of the tribes that I am in, specifically like tabletop gaming, and that has kind of come under a lot of scrutiny recently because there are languages and there are terms that get thrown around that are being looked at in different ways now. But you have right. People who like Star Trek and people who are wrong, right? Like that's sort of the mentality. Thomas and I share that tribe.
It's funny. I'm actually reflecting on your question and thinking a couple things. One, we live in a very divisive world right now, where the tribes that you're in are set off like a rocket when some kind of event happens, and there are some tribes that I might call myself a part of that I'm actually kind of afraid to name. because now in this culture, when you identify with this, you feel as if you get attacked from this other. Well, how could you do this or believe this? And then the other part of it for me is even realizing there are tribes I used to say I belong to that I now say I don't belong to that anymore.
Yeah.
And that there's some painful. There was some pain involved in moving out of that, and it just goes back to say just how powerful a tribal group can be.
Yeah.
That's so interesting you say that. I find like when I don't know if you guys relate to this all. So being a pastor is part of a tribe, like working at a church. When I get my hair cut, I find all kinds of creative ways to say what I do. Like I did some community development, like I don't often just lead with, "Oh, I am a pastor at a church," because there's all sorts of things, and there is some pain in that, or even just can I trust this person, or do I have to fear this person is going to read into something about this tribe that maybe is true or isn't true or has been portrayed as true from other people? Am I setting up some obstacle to relationship by just saying, "Here's a tribe that I'm part of." Mm-hmm. And do I want to maybe not lead with that? Let that come up maybe later, and start with some other ones. Yeah. That's fascinating.
It's a real interesting point because when we identify with a tribe, and again, as you said, we all belong to these cultures and these tribes. We sort of bear all of the markings of that tribe, whether we agree with all of them or not. So when you say you're a pastor, how pastors have handled themselves or the things that they have done. Kind of if you were to go even narrower than that, if you were to say you were a priest, well, there's now a whole nother layer of tribal markings that go on that. But you were saying that we're more divided. Is that, do you think?
I think that it may not be more divided. All these divisions have always been there. But there is an entrenchment that has happened lately that we're struggling to relate across tribal lines. And the mindsets are blending a little bit more roughly than ever before.
So if I may just go on a little brief tangent, do you think that's because it's easier now for us to isolate ourselves in our tribes thanks to the internet, right? It used to be like if I liked this specific thing, I still had to deal with everyone else in my life who didn't necessarily like that. But now I can find that other person in like Germany who likes the exact specific thing that I do, and we can build new fences.
Let me give you the classic. Exactly. Let me give you the classic example of this that is a relatively new thing, but it was a very old thing at one point. There is like the Flat Earth Society. Now I know very little about the Flat Earth Society, except that
their name says
I would assume that they believe in a flat Earth, right? 50 years ago, if someone was like, "I think the Earth is flat," we would be like, "No, I'm pretty sure it's round." And that would be the end of the discussion, right? Because of the internet and all the ability to communicate across the globe,
which they actually use in their language, which amuses me greatly.
Now there's someone over here who believes in a flat Earth, and there's someone way over here who also believes in a flat Earth, and they're talking, and all of a sudden they formed a society because we share this in common. We reject the idea that the Earth is a globe, and we believe it's flat. And I don't know if they're being serious. Honestly, I don't know enough about this to talk about it, but that is a tribe now that has shared language, shared approach to reality. And even though it's very divergent from what most of us would accept as reality, they have clumped together, and we struggle to understand them. They may struggle to understand the rest of us who believe in a globe. It feels really dysfunctional, but there is a real functional reason behind it. There's something about our world that with globalization, just the largeness of cities, it's easy to feel lost.
Right.
And so we desperately need this community that we can find within a tribe. And that's why we clump together like this.
Well, and I think there's something inherently human about just being seen and having something that we care about mirrored in someone else, that we just go, "Oh, someone else thinks this way or feels this way." And that's incredibly affirming. It's incredibly we long for it. We seek it out. And so there's obviously ways that this can be dangerous, but there's a gift too in the interconnectedness of our world where we go, gosh, I can see myself in others, and finally maybe I'm not the only one who kind of feels the way I feel.
Well, and I mentioned this in a sermon one time, but I actually had watched a documentary on the Flat Earth Society, and there was a fascinating part where a psychologist was talking about how even some of the people in that society who have come to believe that the Earth is not flat can't leave the tribe because they've
Right.
so identified themselves with this
Mm.
that to leave this tribe now and say, hey, I do believe the earth is round, it's like they've lost their identity. They've lost all their community. They're completely shunned. And so it's like, well, even my belief systems, I'm gonna submit my belief systems to a tribe because this is where
Is what I
Right.
found here.
and
Yeah.
they can't leave.
So here's the challenge. Here's the problem. While tribes afford some positive things like community and connection, the biggest challenge that I see for us, especially as believers, is cross-cultural experiences are inherently very difficult. And there's a lot of opportunity for misunderstanding. And it used to be like cross-cultural experiences, we would think about traveling overseas or something like that. Now I would submit that we have dozens of these cross-cultural or cross-tribal experiences a week. And we've gotten really bad at interacting with other people's perspective and really understanding it. And I think some of that is just the fatigue of I'm constantly coming across someone that I don't understand. And the flat earthers were like, oh, that's just dumb. I'm not going to even think about it. But they're real people, right? And so there's something about engaging with them that we have to recapture. There's like this temptation to villainize those that we do not understand, and especially those who come from tribes that we don't relate to the mindset, or the mindset takes a little bit of effort to understand. And I see that as one of the biggest problems. I'm curious, have you guys seen other downsides to kind of this entrenched, highly segmented tribalism that we have in our culture?
There's one that's on my heart right now, working with churches in our city. During all of kind of this racial unrest and the stuff that we're working through, one group of churches of a certain kind of denominational or belief systems put together kind of this rally where they were going to march to City Hall and ask for some change and reform. This other group over here organized this giant prayer rally, and they had that in this park. And what was interesting is a friend of mine went to this rally, the first rally, and one of the things that came up, she said, well, they kept saying, where are all the other pastors? Where are all the other pastors? And my response to her was, we weren't invited. I would say I was in the second tribe, and we weren't invited to this. And watching that at this prayer rally, these people weren't invited. And so you have these two kind of groups in our city that would both say, we believe in Jesus Christ, but they're not working with each other at all. And this one tribe has this approach. This one tribe is trying to put together this kind of document or something, but there's not even the thought that they would invite the others.
Right.
And the divide is so strong that even though we share a common Christ, we're not going to work together. And my heart breaks because I thought, wow, if these two groups could ever just get together, what can we do in this city?
Right.
Yeah.
But we're holding on to our tribes more.
Well, and one of the strange things I think about tribes is what makes it a tribe is that people are excluded. Like that it's the people who are like me that do these things. And the whole thing that gives it identity is that there are some people that aren't part of this, that they don't get it. They don't share my values, language, culture, experience, identity, whatever those things are built around. And so the very identity and function of the tribe is actually to keep people out and to be exclusive. And so, the heroes or the people we try to emulate are the ones who most represent the ideal of that tribe, rather than what would it look like to kind of move beyond this and try to understand others and to be it's the opposite of the tribal mentality, right? Like what we're describing is something that it's the opposite of what we're doing when we create tribes. Is like, no, people are left out. That's the point.
Yeah.
Well, and you get like even in a tribe, as Thomas was saying, right? We have this idea that we still want to build more exclusion, right? Like, instead of saying, hey, everyone is made in the image of God, and that should be our baseline for interaction, we say, well, I don't understand how you can be a Christian and do just fill in the blank. And it's like, no, like there are people in your church who believe radically different things on a variety of topics. Yet, as you said, we still share the same Christ. And somehow that is not enough for us anymore. We want to say, well, you can't be a Christian and do and vote a certain way. And it's like, how do we reconcile even inside the tribe that, you have a variety of denominations, you have people who do things that we would consider hateful to people, yet still say, right, Christ is God, Christ is Lord, Christ is Savior. And you're like, I don't know how to reconcile that, even just inside one of my
Right.
tribes.
And I think that creates a tension that leads us to the wrong action, which is I better be really good at explaining why this is my tribe, why it's the right tribe, and why I'm at peace being in this tribe, as opposed to what we really should be leaning into is how do I get other voices into my life?
Right,
So
we double
it's
down on
not-
exclusivity.
Yeah, we double
Yeah.
down. Yeah.
We become evangelists for that
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Here's what I think as believers, we got to care about this because at some point we're just looking for family, right? And it's like, if you have it, why not double down and keep everyone else out? But there's this verse that has always stuck in my mind as so unique. But I really think it gives us something to do with this tribalism or this segmented reality in society. It comes out of John 17. This is a moment where Jesus is praying, and John has kind of written down the prayer as he remembers it. And he has this part where Jesus is praying to his heavenly Father. It's just Jesus and God talking, right? And Jesus says, my prayer is not for them alone, talking about his disciples. He says, I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message. And then this is what he prays for his people, right? He says that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you've sent me. I've given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I and them, you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you've sent me and have loved them, even as you've loved me. And there's something about this that I think we gloss over so quickly, is that Jesus is asking his Father for something that is only accomplished through God. And the thing that he is asking for is unity. Is that like the segmented, highly tribal mindset that we bring into life would somehow be broken down, and that people would come together as one. And he says that would actually be the proof that we belong to God, that God exists and that he is in us and that we are in him, would be this idea that we are able to rise above the highly segmented tribal mindset. And so there's something that I really believe is true, that as the church, or as the body of Christ on earth, that we are to be people of unity. And the segmented nature of our culture is the one thing that we should not replicate in the church, or maybe not the one thing, but it is something we should not. And there's something about if we are able to be people of unity, that it proves God in a way that nothing else will. That's actually what Jesus is saying here.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, just like to be the church as people of unity, what does that spark? I mean, I look at us and I would say that there's a lot of instances where maybe we have been less than that. But it's this high calling. This is why we talk table here at Pulpit Rock so much, is this is a symbol of unity for us. Does that spark anything with you all?
Well, I think, in one case, it sort of is, I don't want to say a little damning, but right, it's sort of the American Protestant mentality of, hey, if we don't agree, we'll just form our own denomination.
Yes.
And we're going to push our individualism to an extreme where we're all isolated individuals as opposed to a community under, as the body of Christ. Christ doesn't have multiple bodies. He has one body, the church. And it's easy to forget that kind of in our very Western American mindset.
Yeah, he didn't pray. I pray that all of them may be one with 30,000 denominations.
Well, but the other mistake we make on the other side, though, is we think of unity as unity of belief, and then we say, well, let's write down on a piece of paper every position of everything and everyone come and sign on the dotted line, and this is how we're going to be unified. And that's not the unity that is being described here either. And so I think the other mistake is, well, we'll just create a really tight, big fence, and we'll make sure everyone agrees with us in here, and that's the unity we'll have. We all share the same belief. That's just tribalism done in a different sort of way, right?
If you would just believe what I believe, we would have unity.
That's not it. That's not it.
If you would just behave like I want you to, we would have unity.
That's not it.
It's unity around how I've defined it.
Right.
It's interesting to me about that verse too, just that I don't know how time and space work with God, but this thought that if Jesus really was praying for all who would come after, then that means that Jesus is praying for Colorado Springs in 2020 for the believers to be in unity. That's on his heart for us. That's just sobering.
I think where a lot of this comes from is deep in our hearts, we are all afraid that we're not going to measure up to something. Are we in or are we out? And to quiet that fear, we want to create these guidelines. So I'm in, okay, and you're out. Just to quiet that fear. It's much easier to do that than just to accept God's grace in our own life and for the people around us.
Gosh, that'll preach. I like this. I've thought this a few times, but you articulate that really well. There is something about a unity that it requires an inner security, maybe a security in God's love. That people who are uniters, they operate with that. Yeah. That fear is quieted a little bit in them. That was the other verse I wanted to bring into this. It's from Ephesians 4, and the end of it is Paul says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. But the beginning of it is the part that's so relevant. This idea of we as people need to be the people of unity. That's what it means to be the church. But Paul says this, as a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. And then he hits us with the, I don't love this sentence, but he says, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. And then he says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. And I think he's given us those ingredients there. And it's like, oh, of course he would say that. Be completely humble and gentle and patient and bearing with one another in love. And I think like that just means that I'm going to allow you to be human around me and not make you pay for that when you make mistakes or believe different things. And I think there's something about this that it's so simple, it just might work. That if we focused on humility and patience, that even in this highly segmented and tribal society, we could actually cultivate some unity. How have you seen that play out? How do you see that people who fight for unity are able to bridge that gap between tribes, between segments of our society, between mindsets?
I think there's a desire like for unity that is also hardwired in us in the same way that there's a desire for kind of community and to find family. But we do sometimes just need those guides and bridge builders to kind of show us the way and kind of model some of that. I mean, there have been times where I feel like I have come out of my tribal whatever because someone has invited me into something. And so there's someone who's gone before and said, hey, I want you to meet so-and-so and I want you to be part of this. And would you have coffee with us? And following that guide into something that they were kind of being a bridge builder really opened up. And so I want to be that, but I also I need people like that in my life that I can follow into places because I'm not always great at that. Like sometimes I need the invitation to kind of be drawn out into this other thing.
I think that people who are able to be uniters are willing to sit at different tables with different people and willing to, when you sit at a table, it's humble because we're at the same level now and we're having a conversation, which means I'm going to listen to what you are saying. And I think it's a shift from how I would kind of define the tribalism I'm seeing right now in our country is if you are not with me, you are against me. There's no other middle ground. And there could be a shift over to if you are not with me, would you at least understand me? Well, that's only going to take place if we're willing to sit down and have a conversation. And I've had so many times where I've sat with people, and at the end of the conversation, I thought, I don't think my belief on this has changed, but I understand you now. You're not a monster. You don't hate Scripture, or you're a person like me. You just landed somewhere else, and I have to be secure enough, and like you said, to say, and I'm okay walking away from that conversation, holding that. I don't have to fix that person or correct that, but if we could just move from, if you're not with me, you're against me too. If you're not with me, can we at least understand each other? But again, that only takes place through conversations. And a lot of us are afraid to go outside a wall and sit at a different table.
Yeah, it's relational. I mean, that stuff doesn't happen online. Those don't happen on discussion forums. Like it's relationship and it's actually embodied presence with people at the table that changes us in that way.
I think here's the shift we have to accept. Society is not coming together anytime soon. And I think Jesus' prayer kind of informs this theological perspective that unity is miraculous. Unity is accomplished by the Spirit of God. So this segmenting of our society is not going away. I think there's this identity that we can embrace as God's people around being a people of unity, but it takes that humility, it takes that patience, it takes bearing with people. And we just have to embrace it. And I think the highly segmented nature of our society, if we accept that, it actually gives us this incredibly redemptive and incarnational action that we can be, and we can bring to bear on a segmented society, bringing others together in unity. And I think that has to be our identity as God's people. I mean, that if for no other reason, that's what Jesus prayed. Right. But I think it has to be something that we own. But owning it means owning humility. You know.
Yes, good.
Jonathan, there's something. There's a time in the New Testament where Christianity is still kind of getting formed, and it was originally kind of formed out of the Jewish faith. And there was this growing movement happening where people were thinking, well, yes, Jesus Christ is who we believe in, but he's the Jewish Messiah. And he was Jewish, and he had Jewish beliefs. And so really, if you want to become a Christian, anyone can become a Christian, but really to be a real Christian, you need to become a Jew. Mm-hmm. So we need you to get circumcised, we need you to eat kosher, we need you to observe holy festivals, and even Peter began to kind of buy into that a little bit, and it was starting to form some tribes. And long story short, Paul had to confront him face to face. Well, why did he confront him? In Galatians chapter 2, verse 14, he says, the reason I had to confront Peter because I saw that he was not acting in line with the gospel. Mm-hmm. So he was elevating this tribalism thing and saying this tribalism thing is not just a social issue or a racial issue or a faith issue. It is a gospel issue. And that's where I love where you're taking us, because if we can hold on to what unifies us is the gospel. It's the resurrection of Christ. That's where we are most unified, and it all radiates out from there. But the problem is we sometimes, even in Christianity, let our own tribes eclipse the gospel, and that becomes more important. So
it's good.
Well, thank you guys all for this discussion. This has been a great episode of Welcome to the Table. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed your place here at the table. We will be back on YouTube in a week, and the podcast is updated. You can find us at Pulpit Rock's website. So again, thank you. Look forward to welcoming you to the table next time.